Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a series where we have conversations about what really drives winning work. Today's topic, bid management, the role that shapes revenue long before anyone signs a contract. Something about this role hasn't been adding up for a long time for me. Bid management influences decisions that shape revenue and margin and risk long before a deal is ever closed. It also shapes real outcomes for people, because when businesses win the right work the right way, they protect jobs, they create jobs, and that matters. And yet, in many organizations, this role is still treated as operational or admin, rather than the professional commercial function it can be. So today's conversation is about that gap and why it keeps costing organizations more than they realize. Before we go further, just a quick word on who I am. I'm Izane Cloete-Hamilton. I'm the COO at nFold. And I work in bid management and proposals for a living. So this isn't a theoretical interest for me. I care about this role because I've seen what it can do when it's taken seriously and how much value gets lost when it isn't. I'm joined today by three incredible professionals whom I'd like to introduce right now, and they represent different angles of this industry. Marika, Neil, and Larissa. If you'll turn on your cameras. Good morning, good morning.
Morning.
I believe Neil is running a little bit late, so we are going to, like good bid managers, get on with it. So Marika is a senior manager of a global bid office, an experienced bid professional, and an APMP certified practitioner. She's also the co-chair of APMP Sub-Saharan South Africa, and she has deep hands-on experience in pursuit and proposals. Larissa is the CEO of a strategic proposal consultancy in South Africa. She's a certified APMP professional and fellow who works at the sharp end of commercial strategy and bid delivery. So today is not a conversation about tools or templates or tactics. It's about seeing the role clearly, understanding why it's so often used below its potential, and what changes when it's treated deliberately by organizations and by the people who do the work. Let's start with the human reality of how, pardon me, most people end up in this role. So this is a question to Marika and Larissa. Most people don't deliberately choose a career in bid management. Let's be honest. Most of us accidentally landed in it. So briefly, tell us your story and tell us, when did you first realize that you were shaping outcomes and not just documents? Let me start with Marika.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Izane. Well, I definitely did arrive here rather than choosing to be here. My early on interest spanned more across psychology and architectural design because I love people. I love to make a difference in people's lives, and people energize me. And I love drawing and designing things. But instead, I started my career in travel and tourism, believe it or not, because I was going to travel the world and see beautiful places, which we did. It was before internet, though. And we had to go and look at these beautiful places, explore them, come back and tell people about them and convince them to go and travel and go see those destinations. And then from there, I landed in debtors and creditors role. And then from there to marketing at Dimension Data, called then now Entity Data. And that was about 15 years ago. And from there moved into a bid administrator and a quality specialist role. And it was really in this role where I started seeing how people make decisions based on influence or positioning. And then from there, I progressed to a senior manager role. I spent 3 years at Deloitte as a senior manager in the winning business. And then I moved back to Entity Data for the past 6, 7 years. Oh, I'm not allowed to do that 6, 7 thing, am I? Children say it's embarrassing. 6, 7 years, I head up the South African bid office. And recently, September last year, I moved into the global senior manager role at NTT. But looking back at this now, I guess it wasn't accidental. Every single step of this way or this journey has taught me more about people. I learned a lot about people and how people make decisions, not just formatting documents. That's my story.
Larissa, what's your story?
I guess it's similar. I mean, I didn't grow up saying I want to be in bid management or a tender manager. In fact, I didn't even know it existed. I actually arrived here through operations, and then I got the opportunity to move into sales.
Ett problem har tyvärr uppstått med anslutningen. Försök igen om en liten stund.
At the time, I was taught that, the classic bad sales practices. Chase everything, have a big pipeline, promise everything, and let the bid team figure it out later. So I was that salesperson who thought proposals were just paperwork. And then I met Izane, who was at the time running the bid office and marketing office. And when I asked for a proposal overnight, she laughed at me. And she said, that's not how winning actually works. She's like, And that moment changed everything. I call it my light bulb moment. And really, I fell in love. Izane introduced me to the Association of Proposal Management Professionals, and that introduced me to best practices, people like John Williams and Sandy Pullinger and Nigel Dennis, who really taught me that the bid office is a revenue generation department of an organization. It is not simply an admin function, although, yes, that's part of it, but it is one of the most strategic, commercially powerful professions in a business. And it's vital to sales and business growth. And that's becoming even more prominent now as we get less face time with customers and as procurement and governance processes try to make sure that there is better processes and less emotion put into these decisions. And really, I think it's where customer insights, competition, business strategy, storytelling, and teamwork need to collide. And from that point, I didn't just fall into bid management. I purposely chose it. I got certified. I've led major bid functions supporting over 250 organizations or businesses, and eventually bought nFold from Sandy Pullinger, who was very important, and partnered with my mentor, ex-boss and friend, Izane. Because when bid management's taken seriously, it's designed deliberately. It doesn't just improve proposals, it transforms how businesses win. And this is one of the most exciting and rewarding career paths. I'll tell you, it's not easy, it's not for everyone, but I love it.
I love the stories. I just want to check, Neil, are you online? I know you battled with the link. Oh, great. Why can't we see you? Okay,
Hello, Neil.
that's okay. Neil,
Hi, everybody.
not sure why we're not seeing you, but we can hear you. So, quickly, what we want to know from you and Marika and Larissa is, because people very often don't choose this as a deliberate career, how did you end up in bid management? What's your story? How did you land in it?
Well, as you say, I just landed in it. But I think I studied and I became an engineer and I qualified. And as soon as I qualified, it was literally a month into qualifying, and there was a major downturn in the engineering industry. And I landed up going to work for a manufacturing company. And slowly, as I rose through the ranks there, I started to be on the road and going out to clients and designing solutions for them, etc. And guess what? I was writing an offer of a particular product, the design specs, what it was going to cost. And I didn't even know that that was a proposal. It was just something, a quote. And I provided that for, I worked in that industry for 17 years, still not knowing that I was actually doing proposals. And that was very aligned and linked to sales. And I changed career slightly, and I went into financial services, and I was there for 6 or 7 years, and I was selling and sending people proposals of how to invest their money, still not realizing that I was involved in proposals. And then I really it wasn't really for me, and I wanted to get back into engineering, and somehow I landed up at a small company, and during the interview, the CEO said, I don't know where we will use you in this organization because you're so multi-skilled, and yet you haven't done engineering for 17 odd years. So how do we bring you, you'd start at the bottom at a sort of a senior level. And then suddenly, midway through the interview, he said, I know exactly where we're going to use you. We're going to make you head of our proposals department. And then suddenly, that's how I got into it. And then I started doing a bit of research and speaking to people, and lo and behold, a similar name, Sandy Pullinger, said, come join us at APMP. So I joined as a member, and it wasn't very long thereafter I joined onto the board, or the team that was assembled. And that's when I did my foundation certification because John Williams came out to South Africa and ran a session at EOH, and wow, that just opened my eyes. And I realized that in the role I was doing, it was very common to work most nights till 1, 2 in the morning, getting bids out, and it was just not sustainable. And going through foundation, I just stamped my authority, and I said, this is the way we're going to move. And I went and spoke to the CEO. I got buy-in from the CEO, and within 6 months, we had changed the mindset of that company and the individuals. There were still those who were chancers and tried to I remember one of my coordinators, somebody walked in and said, it's 8:30, and in those days we used to go and deliver bids. I've got a bid that's due at I think it was 10:30 or 11. Here's the document. I'm handing it over to you. Can you please print it, bind it, package it, and go? And I was sitting in the same room, and the coordinator turned around to the engineer and said, there's the printer, there's the punch, the binding machine, there's a packaging area. You do it, and there's the telephone number for the drivers. And I just stood there, and I didn't say a word. I didn't disagree with her, and I didn't step in. And the guy, the color just drained in his face, and he then proceeded to try and put everything together. But by the time, I think he left at about 10:20, and that was from Johannesburg to Pretoria. So there was no likelihood he was going to get in. And thereafter, he was the first person to approach us really early. So sometimes you've got to do the hard lessons. And I just stood we got into a bit of trouble, but I just stood behind, and I was just behind the coordinator. I said, sorry. And then, you know, I think it's just the career has just blossomed through APMP and certification, and just sticking to our guns that we are professionals and this is the way we're going to work. If you don't like it, you can do it yourself.
Thanks, Neil. You know what's coming through very clearly here is it's like the stories are the same, the characters are different, the actors are different, but the influence has always been there, even though the role isn't always been set up to support it. I did neglect to introduce Neil, so pardon me if I'm taking a step back, but Neil Philipson is based in the UK, originally, as you can hear, from South Africa. Neil is also an APMP fellow and a senior commercial and bid leader. So he brings a nice executive level view of how bids influence business decisions globally. So I want to introduce a distinction that explains a lot of what we've heard, and it synthesizes the experience that a lot of us have had. Many organizations blur two very different functions: sales support, which is volume, and bid management, which is value. Both matter, both are legitimate, but they're designed to optimize completely different outcomes. And when they are blurred, you get blurred results. So when you design a value role, a strategic bid management role for speed and throughput, something gives. So let's start with Neil. Where have you seen bid roles being treated like volume functions, and what breaks when that happens?
Sure. So within engineering, we do not have salespeople as such. We have engineers that act as salespeople, and they're not natural salespeople. Well, that's generalizing, but I'd say 99% of them are not. And so what happens is, in some of the organizations that I've been in that are predominantly engineering, you do get those that just want to bid anything and everything that says EOI, RFP, ITT. It's, and it's strategic and we've got a right to win, and they try and justify it. The problem with that is you then just churn out bids, and often, we've had writers who just churn those sort of bids out. And when you actually go and do the analysis of those bids over a year, you'll see that your bid win rates and opportunity rates are dismal. You just don't win stuff. And then when you do win stuff, you're on terms that you can't accept. Then you have long negotiations with the client, and you just never tie things up. Or you agree a contract, and then the client is the most horrible client, and the project just loses money, etc. And that just is a trend. So you've almost got to identify that trend and start showing people, no, this is not the way that we should be doing it. And then, sorry, I hope this is part of the question. I think on the bid management side is when we actually start professionalizing the process and still working with those engineers, but saying, right, you know this client, you're working on projects with them. Can we sit with this client and sort of understand what their pipeline is coming up and identify some of the opportunities, and let's position
instead
and
of bidding
pre-position
for all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Larissa, what's your experience in this designing it the wrong way, value for volume, volume for value.
I'm sort of laughing because I'm coming from a consulting perspective, and if I replace the word engineers with salespeople, the story is still very much the same. And I just think that's because there's a lot of bad sales practice that I think is often emanated from the top, which is really another topic. But I think, Izane, for me, it would be easier to tackle this question to say, how many organizations actually treat their function like a strategic and value center? Because that's much rarer, because the majority of organizations are still treating it like a volume center. And unfortunately, that has gotten worse since COVID. There's lots of reasons for it. But, I just recently, and it's very, very recent and sensitive to me right now, but I recently worked with a client that, we ran a bid that we had over a year to prepare for, and it was a major opportunity. I mean, we're talking big billion rands opportunities. And even though we had so much time, which by the way is rare, as we know in South Africa, a lot of stuff was left to the final week, and lots of last minute changes, late inputs, no time for effective reviews. It was really, the bid office eventually became the dumping ground. The team was exhausted and burnt out. Let's just say we didn't have a lot of sleep. And, when I challenged it with the customer, the response was simply, well, this is how it is. You should know this is how it is. And I said, actually, that's not how it is. And the truth is, it doesn't have to be. But the customer's also not entirely wrong. There are too many companies that do this. But there are companies who invest in this profession. There are companies, like Neil's company is a perfect example, is that, and unfortunately, the statistics prove this. So I'm really confirming what Neil said, right? Is the statistics show it's a minority. If we look at how the best wins from strategic proposals shows that in their How the Best Wins report, which is based on global benchmarking, it shows that only 8% of organizations have what strategic proposals calls a strategic plus maturity level in their bid function. And guess what? They win 75% or more of the opportunities they're pursuing. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the majority run volume and sit at an ad hoc to tactical maturity level. This means that they don't have the proper processes, the proper investment. They're not skilling in their resources. And the recent Lupio and APMP statistics reports show that the average win rate is 45%. That means they're losing more than what they're winning. And what's interesting is the companies that win more bid less because they're more strategic about the opportunities they pursue. And that means they're not burning out their people. And the ones that win less bid more. And we've seen that in the statistics over the last few years.
Yeah.
The point is, what breaks when you run volume and you're not intentional but strategic, and I'm not saying there isn't some merit to volume, but it's how you run it. People burn out. Company reputation is impacted because you're actually delivering bad quality. But as Neil said, the biggest difference, what breaks is your win rates. You lose. So you're actually wasting resources.
So talking about resources, and this is something that I struggle with today still. I'm gonna ask this question to Marika first. When someone outside our profession asks what you do, how do you explain it?
Izane, I think it's a very good question because, when children go to school and they ask, what does your mom do? What does your dad do? They still don't know even how to articulate what we do. So I guess if we're not able to explain it, how on earth are we going to have the rest of the world understand it? And I think the simplest way for me to put it, other than we don't just do documents and format documents and write documents, is we help people make decisions and to articulate the value to win the deals. Simply that.
Neil, what would you say? How do you explain it when people ask outside the industry? What do you do?
I just tell them I win work to keep my project teams gainfully employed. And,
okay, nice.
and,
Laura? Oh, sorry, Neil.
No, that's it. Just plain and simple.
I tell people we help businesses to win more through strategic proposals and pitch consultancy. But I also love John Williams' take that he always says we help businesses to tell stories that win. And that's my elevator pitch. But as we know, there's so much more to what we do.
A lot of you know this, and I think till this day it's true. My husband thinks I copy and paste for a living. That's what I do. Yes. So when organizations get bid management wrong, what do they usually misunderstand about the role? Marika.
For me, when they get it wrong, it's the perception that we are an admin function and we are a process factory, right? Instead of we are this revenue shaping, generating role. And when bid teams are brought in late in decision making and we just get handed over and we get asked to, as Larissa mentioned, just to formatting and put it all together the last minute. That's when they get it wrong, and that's the misunderstanding of what we do. And for me, we are not just that process factory. We believe we are a strategic function. However, we need to show up like that. And you need to have experience and being brought in, have a seat at the table much sooner to help show them that it could be different and change that mindset of we just the admin function.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. Yeah. When these organizations get it wrong and they don't understand, what are the consequences to the business and to the individuals? Because remember, we're looking at it from two sides here. There are the organizations who don't understand the value and the potential of bid management. And then there are the individuals who don't know how to plot a deliberate, intentional career. So with that in mind, my question again, when these organizations get it wrong, what are the consequences for the business and for the individuals?
So let's start with the business first. The consequence for the business, I will say simply is reputation and mistrust with the customers, right? Because you are not putting necessarily those quality proposals that win the winning stories to the client. So you win less and it damages the trust with the customer, right? So there's reputation. And I feel similarly to the individuals. It was also a reputation because the way that people will treat you will be the same and will just be the, what did you say, copy and paste person, right? You will be seen like that because that is how people see you. And the risk in that is that that's how people always going to see you if you don't change that narrative and you
if you show up as
that's all I do.
Person,
that's all I do. Yeah. Like Neil mentioned, you need to challenge. You need to not tolerate the bad behavior, and you need to be able to stand up and have the difficult conversations because you should be confident in what you do. And it's not easy because we know we have some strong individuals, and I always call them colorful people that have big opinions of, I am telling you this is what you will be doing. So it just in short is on in closing. For me, it's really about for ourselves specifically, we need to show up differently, be confident to have deliberate conversations and tough conversations of what we do, because that's how we're going to start being seen differently.
Neil, if I could ask you the second part of the question, when these organizations, see it wrong, what's the consequences for the individuals and for the business?
So I'll just revert back, is sometimes I think it is panic bidding that takes place. Your pipeline And I always find this around January, February every year. Suddenly, oh no, our pipeline's not strong enough. You need to bid, you need to bid, you need to bid. And what starts to happen is we are just seen as what I call cannon fodder. They just throw us to the wolves, and we just pulling CVs together, case studies. There's no strategic intent. There's no thought around the bid. And when I look back in those bids, we don't win them. I think our reputation goes down with the client because our quality is not great, etc. And the morale within the team also sags. And I find that the most devastating part, because it takes quite a long time to build up your reputation. And then in 1 month, it can be wiped out because we just called in to just bid whatever, whatever moves. And that becomes very disheartening. So it's almost heading this off at the pass early on by doing a lot of pre-bidding, and what we call capture, to make sure that we have got that client tied up and we know what's coming, etc. And if we can just keep that moving, I find that can help. But it's it's not good for the business or the people.
I think what you're talking about, or what I hear, is that this is about design. It's not about effort. It's not about the effort. It's not even about the motivation, but it's about design. And when I say design, is the role, the process, the bid offers, the influence. Because design, intentional design, determines how people behave and what they're accountable for. And I think it also determines whether this role ever gets close to its potential.
Izane, if you don't mind me just adding a comment to this, we see this. We see this we obviously, as a consultancy, we do a lot of benchmarking for clients. And what always stands out for me is they're quite shocked to see because part of our process is we do like an anonymous survey. And sometimes the feedback is something like, majority of people think that their proposals will actually embarrass the company. And that's quite a shock when they see that, right? And it's literally just their feedback being fed to them. So, when you say, I think we've said what the consequences are, but when bid management goes wrong, it's because there's absolute basics that are missing. They don't qualify, they lack processes, they don't provide enough support and investment into their teams. They don't, like Neil said, do enough they don't link the pre-pursuit activities, if they do them at all. They completely misunderstand the 3 C's, which is your customer, your competition, and your capability, which are the absolute basic fundamentals to having a persuasive bid. And we still see too many companies that think forms, price only is all they need. And they think that bid officers should just run as a silo, as a dumping ground where a document is dropped and we must just do the laundry, rather than the key part of the overall business development process. And to really, and I promise this is my last, can I give my last point, I promise, to really keep people and sales, subject matter experts and managers deliver on time or effectively to support what they claim is a must-win deal. And the bid team ends up working late, scrambling to pull rabbits out of their hats. Okay, I promise I'm off my high horse now.
No, it's okay. You can get back on your horse, but on a specific horse. I want to know, because what you've just said is certainly not things that you knew or did in the beginning. So at what point did the penny drop? At what point did you stop winging it in this career and started treating it as a deliberate, intentional career?
I think I was really lucky because I was really introduced to best practice in the beginning of my journey, thanks to you, Izane. I kind of got into sales, and I met you straight away when I got into sales. And, I mentioned my light bulb moment earlier. And, I've never really turned back. I did what many people do early on. And as Neil said it, and I sometimes fall into that habit sometimes where I took on too much. I tried to carry everything. I learned the hard way about boundaries and structure, but I also became deeply committed to doing this properly, to staying close to best practice. And what is interesting, and this is now like way back, you know, in my story when I was a salesperson, once I adopted this proposal discipline, it didn't just improve my sales outcomes too. I started pursuing fewer opportunities. I was more deliberate, and I actually grew my accounts revenue by over 200% and exceeded my sales targets, not by working or killing the bid office or myself harder, but by working smarter. I stopped winging it early because I saw the results, right? And even
You
now,
must
as
have
an
been a
APMP,
lucky one.
absolutely. And even now, as an APMP fellow, a business owner that's actually doing this now, learning and professional growth in this field never stops, right? Things change. You've got to stay abreast of it. It's a continuous process.
Now, you know, there's another pattern that keeps coming up in practice, and a lot of us have experienced this. We see a lot of titles in this space: bid manager, proposal manager, senior this, head of that, bid specialist. So all sorts of titles. Now, Neil, I'm going to ask you this, and then I'm going to ask Marika. Do these titles actually correlate with capability?
I think that's a super good question. So in our organization, so we've been working the last 3 years to change this mindset, because as you say, we had a multitude of titles. So what we did is we actually put on a roadmap that this was one of the areas that we were going to focus on. And for a year, we literally determined exactly what roles we need in our business. And we just narrowed them down to a couple. So it was a bid coordinator, senior bid coordinator, bid manager, senior bid manager, and then a unit lead for win. And we had graphics writers. And we then created a job description for each of those and what they did within that sort of, not boundary. And we then started to label, you know, we started to give those titles to each person, and we would do a capability assessment of our teams and say, right, this person is definitely a bid coordinator, this person's a senior bid manager because of what they do. And then it also gave career progression to members of our teams, which has been fantastic, because now people are scrabbling to improve themselves. And funny enough, we've put APMP certification, which our company pay for, as part of the various roles. So now people are also getting their certification, so they're upskilling themselves, which then benefits the business. So we've taken that whole chaotic storm of titles and we've narrowed it down, and we said, this is it. And, you know, we still get those people saying, but I need this title. And we say, no, there's no such title. This is what you do. And, you know, if you're working for us, that's what your title will be.
And it's taken you a year, you said. So
yes.
I think it's important to realize it's not an instant. No. Marika.
Yeah.
No, I want to ask you. I want to ask you a slightly different question, but related to this. So I want to know what happens when, let's call it, the right title is hung around the wrong person's neck, and vice versa. So what I'm asking is, you are called a this, but you can only function here. What happens, in your opinion?
So, Izane, it's similar to, you know, it's all about reputation, credibility, and trust. Because if the titles don't match the capability, it really damages, I want to go as far as say, the profession, right? And in my experience, I've seen the same people, this where people with the different titles, but the same capability are taken more serious, like a director or a senior manager. They do the same things, but the director person is taken more seriously. And on the other side, where a bid administrator has more capability, certification, experience, but they don't get the credit they for. It brings back, Neil mentioned an important thing, it's the morale. It brings down somebody with the right title or the right credibility and capability. It brings that person down because it's then becoming about titles and not about yourself and your growth and what your capabilities are.
So, words in our business, words matter.
Yeah.
We have spent a disproportionate amount of time debating a single word in a proposal because it matters. So I think titles could be dangerous because calling someone senior doesn't necessarily give them the authority or the capability. And it doesn't suddenly fix a badly equipped role. I think, in fact, it can definitely create the opposite problem. When someone's called a senior this, the business relaxes. They go, we've got this, it's sorted, it's perfect. When nothing meaningful has actually changed underneath. So I think when a role with real commercial influence is given a senior sounding title, but no mandate, no structure, and no clear boundaries, both the person and the role and the business pay the price. Since I have you,
but if I could just add on from Neil quickly. Neil, you made a good point about the people and the certification and how do you get it right. So we know that there's a mismatch, but how do we get it right and what can we do? And I think a good thing there, and Larissa mentioned it as well, is when you do those benchmarking, especially on the person itself, to understand your capability and your strength, weaknesses, where the shortfalls are. When you take that to business and you use best practice and you simply say these are the roles, there are 3 different roles and that's it, and match that capability and experience and output from benchmark to that. That is one way to have those conversations to deliberately change the organization's way of putting titles to a person. Thank you.
So I'm going to put this question to all 3, and I'll start with you, Marika. Briefly tell me, is experience alone enough in this profession, or does structured development matter just as much?
No, experience alone is not enough because our environments change. I mean, we've seen it in the last 15 years or even the last 5 years. Tools change. The way people, Larissa mentioned the statistics, how people make decisions, how buyers make decisions. It's constantly changing and we need to stay relevant. So belonging just to the professional community like APMP is not just optional. It's more than that. You need to stay sharp. You need to stay current. You need to stay credible in this environment. So join communities, network with people, be curious.
Neil, same question to you, but with a little bit of a tweak to that. So first of all, is experience enough, or does structured development matter? And what role did professional standards, community, and certification play in growing you in this profession?
I'm glad you asked me that question because
You're welcome.
I think strength is definitely not, it's important to have that. But my career trajectory took off when I started doing the certification. And it really, and from twofold, from the business perspective, they could start to see processes improving. They could see that I could step into a room and I could facilitate and manage a group of individuals. I was a subject matter expert and I knew what was going on, latest trends, etc. And I could challenge those really difficult engineers. And then for my own self, I was then able to do multiple certifications. And for me, it's just grown my wealth and knowledge. If you ever get a chance to speak at conferences, that's also part of your development. If you get a chance to sit on an APMP board or serve your chapter or volunteer, those are the absolute key things. And if I had not actually committed myself and pushed myself and stretched myself, and yes, I worked overtime and I committed time because it's all voluntary, it made a huge impact on my career, my growth. And I can't encourage it enough that you need to get involved in certification and involved in APMP.
Larissa?
Yeah, okay, well, let's answer it twofold. The first question is experience enough? No. But I think that's because bids really fail at submission. They really fail upstream. And I think if you don't do best practices, if you don't understand the best practices, then you don't understand how to deliver the real value that we should be delivering to our organizations. And that is firstly our role in qualification. We've got to play devil's advocate in helping our businesses to pursue the right opportunities. And by the way, this is also something that organizations need to come into the party. It's not always up to the individuals because they need to be empowered to do this. Secondly, in win strategy alignment, right? We need to make sure what sales is promising and positioning is actually carried through consistently into the response. And the company can actually deliver it. That's where the ethics and governance comes in, which is the third part.
Let me pause you there. In the things
Okay.
you've just explained, did professional standards, the community, and certification play a role in growing you up to understand that better and do it better to the benefit of your business, your clients? What role did that play?
It played a huge and massive role. And in fact, Neil and I know very well, Neil got me into being a director on the Sub-Saharan Africa chapter for APMP. And, you know, I worked on the committee a lot with Neil. It makes a massive difference because over time, people began to take the role in me far more seriously. But that comes from the confidence of knowing what to do, to be able to have the right conversations at the right levels to push back, because sometimes we don't get buy-in from people because we just don't explain why. And it's actually quite logical once you know how. And I also grew from being a junior contributor to, quite frankly, and I don't know if this is blowing my own horn, but to a leader and an advocate for this profession, right? But the biggest change is the impact. You know, when it was done more deliberately, it doesn't just win contracts. It wins not only the right work, but, and in our world, those wins represent billions and billions of rands, you know, every year. That translates into real outcomes, right? Businesses growing, thousands of jobs being created and retained. And when you realize that, this profession isn't just exciting, it's deeply meaningful, but it does not just happen from experience. I think too many people think, okay, I've got experience, I can do bids. My worst thing that people say is that, oh, I know how because I've been doing this for years. But why are you not part of a professional community? That sets a baseline. You've got to have the fundamentals. And have you practiced that skill? It's not just good enough to learn that skill. You've got to practice, you've got to implement, you've got to master it.
Marika, what would you add? I think a lot have been said by Neil and by Larissa. Anything you want to add to
this? There's not much to add, but I think in agreement with that, and for me, I'll tell a personal story, is that I agree with Larissa. Only when, you know, I did all the certifications that I've done, join communities, you know, broaden the network, collaborate with people, engaging, is when I think I started taking myself more seriously in a good way. And when I started taking myself more seriously, I could have better, more deliberate, confident conversations. And I wasn't as, I want to say, scared almost to have those tough conversations. I felt more confident to have them and brave enough to have them. And once I started doing that, it just kind of becomes this better, I don't know, like this blossom world of passion that you just knew that you love, that you didn't fall into, that you started loving. And just that I second that what they were saying.
So, quick, short answers only. If you were speaking to someone on this webinar, an individual right now who feels stuck, what's the one piece of advice you would give them? I'm going to start with Marika. One piece.
Stop working in isolation. Join a community, make a friend, make a connection, and start having deliberate conversations.
Neil?
I would say get a purpose, and I think sometimes a purpose is certification, and set yourself some goals to achieve that certification and get involved in APMP in some voluntary way.
Laura?
I think get clear on whether you're willing to treat this as a deliberate career, not just a job. Because when you do, you have to own your value and help businesses take that role seriously too. And that means investing in your growth. And this is not just for individuals, but businesses too. The question is, how serious are you and your organization about winning?
Yeah.
So let me bring this back to where we started. Bid management, when it's done right, shapes revenue decisions. And that's not just an opinion, it's just how things work. Okay. So the conversation today has been about the gap between that reality and how the role is actually treated in so many organizations and by individuals themselves. A role that influences what gets pursued, how it's positioned, and what level of risk is acceptable. It's often still designed and measured and rewarded as if it were only admin. When that happens, it's not just the business that loses capability, it leaves value on the table, it leaves money on the table. So the question this conversation should leave you with isn't whether bid management matters. That part is obvious. The real question is whether you and your organization are prepared to treat it at the level of impact it actually has. And if you're honest, you already know the answer to that. Because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Neil, Marika, Larissa, thank you for being generous with your experience and for being so honest about what works, what doesn't, and where this profession still has a lot of work to do. I really appreciate you taking the time to be part of this conversation. That matters. And to everyone who has joined today, thank you for showing up, for leaning into the conversation, and for taking this role seriously. The quality of the questions and the engagement tells me that this matters to more people than is usually acknowledged. I wish you the best on your journey, on your conversations that you need to have in your organization. For those who wonder, this has been recorded and we will share it within a day or two. You'll receive a follow-up from us, and you're welcome to engage with us, ask questions. It's about the community and building this profession. I thank you. Have a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Oh, Connie has a hand up and questions. I don't know.